Welcome back. A recent study done at Sick Kids Hospital showed that the loss of in-class learning had a significant impact on youth and child mental health. Here with tips on how parents can help kids readjust to in-class learning is child and youth therapist Tania DaSilva. Welcome back to the show, Tania.
Thanks for having me.
Tania, let's start with why kids experience such anxiety this time of year.
There's always those typical back to school anxieties, right? So for a lot of our kids, we're noticing that they're feeling anxious because there is this increase in expectation. There is a change in routine and schedules. They're also now starting to think about the social and academic piece. So they're getting that social anxiety of, am I going to struggle socially? Is there going to be social pressures? Am I going to fit in? There's also the academic anxiety that comes with it as well, where am I going to understand the material? Is it going to become harder? And one that a lot of people don't think about is for most kids, they're thinking about who's my teacher going to be? And am I going to like them, right? So they're already considering that teaching style and if they're going to be able to adapt to that. With COVID, there's added another level now of those anxieties where kids are not just worried about adapting to a teacher and teaching styles. They're now worried about, am I even going to stay in school? Am I going to have to go back virtually? If we're thinking about virtual, a lot of these kids admit that they were gaming instead of actually paying attention to what their teachers were saying. So they have fallen behind. And socially, some of these kids have been out of school for a year and a half. So they don't even know if they're returning to friends.
So, Tania, I'm curious, how have you noticed, or in what ways have you noticed the impact of COVID on youth and children when it comes to mental health?
We've actually never been busier. So since COVID started, we're constantly having to bring on new therapists. So that says a lot in terms of where mental health is at. We're noticing there's obviously an increase in anxiety and depression, eating disorders, self-harm. There's a lot of family trauma and family struggles that are happening as well that kids are now being exposed to. So that's for sure growing. But the simplest way that we've been explaining it to the families that we work with is we face stress on a daily basis. So there's acute stress, which is typically short bursts of stress where we feel it and it's gone. So if our kids are going back to school, they're feeling a little stressed, they settle in, it goes away, the school year continues. Or they have a test, they get stressed, they study for it, they write it, it goes away. So acute stress is essentially small bursts, it comes and goes. Chronic stress is that stress that stays longer. So we're feeling it daily, it's kind of continuing on. And if we think about COVID, we've all been in a state of stress that has continued. We're still unsure. We're still feeling not secure about what this year is going to be like. So we've all been in a state of chronic stress, and chronic stress leads to mental illness, but also physical illness as well. So it impacts us in so many different ways. And the scary part about chronic stress is that sometimes we get used to it. So we don't feel it the same way, but it's still there. So I think that's the biggest impact, is that chronic stress that we're all still feeling daily.
What signs and symptoms should parents sort of be looking out for in their kids to see if they're having issues?
So we usually break it down just to simplify it. So whenever we get calls from parents, whether it's the beginning of the year or throughout the year, it typically falls into three categories. So there's the social struggles, the emotional struggles, and the behavioral struggles. So when it comes to back to school, some of our kids will struggle. We'll see them socially start to isolate. They are starting to really attach themselves to a particular teacher or one child or their parents. We're seeing that kind of painfully shy child who's coming in and just not able to really connect. So there's that lack of social connection, even a couple weeks in. For emotions, this kind of varies. We can see kids that have meltdowns, that are going into full-out panic, tears. We're seeing it come out in a lack of emotional regulation as well as a lack of confidence. So they're saying things like, I can't do this, or no one likes me. So a lot of that negative talk is coming up. And behaviors are always interesting because teachers will sometimes very much focus on this behavior needs to be managed, but sometimes we're not noticing that it might be coming from anxiety. So if we're seeing aggression, it can be because they're having a hard time managing the anxiety they're feeling. We see a lot of regression, so kids who are regressing in sleep and eating habits and independence. They're also pulling back and avoiding things that they once liked. So these are ones that sometimes get labeled as behaviors, but they can be reconnected to anxiety.
So let's just say you're in a scenario where you can't get your kid to school. They just won't go. What are some extra ideas that parents can go to in order to help those kids?
I think the first thing is meeting your child where they're at that day. Because for us, we have this expectation that it's the first day, You need to go, you need to be there all day. And then that parent guilt sets in too. We see it all the time where parents are like, everyone else's kid is fine. Why is mine not fine, right? So what we always suggest is, first of all, seeing it outside of us where it doesn't reflect us as parents. It doesn't reflect the way the rest of the year is going to go. This is how they're feeling right now. So let's meet them where they're at. What can we do? So what we typically do with our kids too is we'll break it down into steps. So, okay, you don't feel like you can stay here all day, but do you feel like, we can just walk up to the fence or to the door or to the classroom? So if we break it up, then they can keep slowly working towards what that is. If it's a half day, okay, it's all right. We're getting closer. So sometimes it's thinking about where are they at? How can we meet them there? And how can we break it into steps and slowly start working towards that next milestone versus that final expectation? If kids are still really struggling, then it's okay to kind of throw in the towel that day, go home and essentially let them kind of work through those emotions. But you also want to make sure you're planning for the future, right? So that's usually where we do suggest, reaching out to a therapist, to a professional, because they are professionals. And honestly, kids do typically respond differently to another adult outside of their parents. So you can say the exact same thing to your child, but if it's coming from me, it's sometimes a little bit more well received. So working with a therapist not only helps them receive the information, it also helps make sure that we're presenting the appropriate information that they need. So we're assessing, what they're struggling with, and then we're giving them the tools and strategies to start succeeding in reintegrating into school. The great thing about working with a professional too is a lot of the times we work with the school. So we'll connect with the teachers, we'll give them support strategies, and it becomes a team effort instead of parents feeling like they're left alone to figure it out.
What would you say to parents who are still wary of having their kids back in class?
This is always something that comes up, and realistically, obviously, there's worries about COVID and shutdowns, and there is a lot of things that we're still concerned about, but the pros really do outweigh the cons, at least right now, where a lot of our kids, they need that social interaction. They really, really are missing it. And in terms of their academic performance, a lot of our kids did not do well online. Many of them admitted it, right? So I think being in a classroom where there's actually a teacher there to come and support them and help them work through it and essentially keep a real eye on them, because it's very difficult over a screen, it is going to help them socially and academically. And something that sometimes we don't consider is if we are going through family struggles or there's things that's happening at home, our kids are in earshot. Right? They're hearing us maybe be frustrated with employees or at work or with our partners, and that impacts them too. So going to school does become an escape for a lot of our kids, where they get to kind of tune out, potentially things that are happening at home and focus on just being kids for a little while. So there's definitely a lot of pros in the return as well.
Tania, thank you so much for this timely and important information. It was great.
Thanks for having me.
Everyone watching at home, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.